Welcome to Lecture 10, United States. Introduction. Few countries and their political institutions have received as much media paparazzi as much as the United States. This may be attributed to the fact that it is the world's most dominant power, although that status may be changing. The American public administration system and the democratic climate within which it works have been responsible for its status of primacy on the world stage. In more recent time, the US economy has been experiencing periods of turbulence, a consequence of two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and an economy overstrained by overconsumption of its home soil. Recent reform measures have been geared at reducing spending and saving more. Whether the United States is having troubles or not, public institutions work in that society, and that is why we are fascinated by America. Course objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Give an account of the overview of government. 2. Identify and explain the principal feature of public administration in the United States. And 3. Discuss the character of subnational administration. Historical development. The United States of America is a new nation. Unlike most other countries, we have examined the predate modern times. It is essentially a modern invention. The creation of modern America was done at the expense of the Native American population, a fact that can hardly be denied. After years of colonialism, Americans fought a war of independence that would eventually culminate in a declaration of independence. The United States signed an Article of Confederation which vested all power in the states. Confederacy would eventually proved unbeneficial as each of the states became adversarial towards one another, imposing high tariffs that almost brought interstate trading to a halt, according to Oz 2006. To avert an impending danger, states sent delegates to Constitutional Convention in 1787 with the intention of amending the Article of Confederation. However, what seemed beneficial was not an amendment but an override alteration. Admittedly, any new proposal must emphasize the need to ameliorate the challenge. A promising option was to centralize power to overcome disagreements and incompetent state governments and to protect against the arbitrary exercise of power. This proposal received strong advocacy from founding American leaders such as James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay. The ideas they expressed have come to represent the key issues that remain at the heart of American politics to this day, and these ideas have remained at the heart of American politics to this day. They have come to be known as the Federalist Papers. According to one of the founding fathers, James Madison, it was important to be wary of what he termed the evil of factions. By this, he meant a situation in which one state would become so powerful that it could attempt to dominate the others. To avoid this situation, he advocated the concentration of power in the national government. This was done through certain institutions. First was the adoption of a presidential system, and second, a system based on checks and balances and separation of power. In other words, should the president become tyrannical, it can be checked by the legislature or judiciary, and his power were defined. Third was a system that provided for and granted fundamental human rights. After the Constitution was ratified, Congress and the state passed the first 10 amendments, the Bills of Rights. Since the era of attempts to build a robust state structure, the United States has undergone some challenges. Notably, among these was the Civil War between the North and South that threatened the Union. The southern parts are threatening to break away from the Union, leading to a war to keep the Union, the North. In the second half of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution created enormous concentration of wealth as well as other accompanying challenges such as associated urbanization challenges, the rise of slums and shanty towns. Rather than enacting welfare policies, the United Nations instead instituted antitrust law that forbade monopolies and oligopolies. This emphasized America's preference for competitive markets and minimal government intervention, according to House 2006. In the wake of the Great Depression in the late 1920s and 1930s, the United States implemented welfare and social security policies under Roosevelt, the New Deal, and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society in the 1960s. Whatever we may think of those programs, they did mark a dramatic expansion of the American states at both national and local level, although they have been viewed with skepticism by the American public than in other societies. For all the developments that American political life has witnessed, there is still a great deal of continuity as evident in the survival of its core institutions over 3 centuries since they were established. Overview of the government. America practices a federal and presidential system. Powers are vested in one identifiable person who is both the head of state and head of government. The president appoints his ministers, known as secretaries, in the United States. They are usually appointed subject to the approval of the Senate. The Congress is the central lawmaking body made up of the Senate and House of Rep. As chief executive, the president has the authority to develop and propose legislation and therefore has a significant role in framing the laws of the federal government. Each secretary is supported by a number of assistant secretaries who preside over the major division within each department. Below them is the vast army of civil servants. In most cases, secretaries of the states are often close confidants of the president, who may have assisted his campaign, or are often individuals who will not particularly close to the president have earned his and the nation request as authorities in their particular field. The presidency refers to the robust bureaucratic structure that is built around the president. The civil service. The civil service in the United States has undergone gradual transformation from a system based on a patronage to one based on merit belonging with the Pendleton Act of Congress in 1883. In the US, like Britain, the bureaucrat is expected to work under political direction, though he or she may be actively involved in policy formulation. The bureaucracy is viewed as a neutral instrument of the government. Structurally, in the US, the executive departments are the major units of administration, but included in the executive branch are a host of regulatory commissions, government corporations, and other agencies. American civil service is characterized by emphasis on position held and requirements for satisfactory performance of the duties connected with it, rather than the assessment of individual potential in appropriate rank category. In the United States, there is no clear-cut grouping of civil servants according to hierarchy, although the idea of a senior civil service has been recommended. Another characteristic of the US civil service is that it retains in the most senior positions civil servants who are chosen by the president or secretaries, that is, ministers. Under this system, the federal civil service reserves around 10% of its position for patronage appointments, so that when the president leaves office, so do approximately 200,000 senior bureaucrats, according to Chandler 2000. The senior appointments are subject to vetting and approval by the Senate, although close scrutiny is in practice only reserved for the more senior roles. The less exalted ranks of patronage appointments are often recruited by the secretaries of state or their senior assistants. Most of them come from business organizations or from the academia. Some others are from the permanent civil service, all of whom leave once the tenure of the administration expires. Agencies. There are a number of semi-independent public agencies, although many functions that are assigned to agencies in other countries are executed at the state and local level on ad hoc basis. Because of the preference for individualism as against state intervention, services such as health care are carried out by the private sector or at the state and local government level. Thus, the number and extent of agencies at the federal level is relatively small compared with the bureaucracy as a whole, expending about 5% of the federal budget. Although a few agencies are established as part of the President's office and Congress, most of these organizations are subject to the Department of State. Agencies independent of the central framework of departments were established with some reluctance. The first was the Interstate Commerce Commission. Federal, states, and local governments. The basic element of the separation of powers that characterized the United States liberalism are the division between federal and state governments and the independence of the local government sector. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution established that the states are responsible for governing their territories on all matters not reserved by the Constitution of the federal government. Thus, the states have constitutionally political discretion over a wide range of areas. The Constitution makes no reference to local government. The local power to establish local governments fall to the states. This view not only empowers the states against federal incursion into local politics, but also ensures that local government cannot claim a constitutional right to exist independent of the state. With a very few exemptions, states divide the whole of their territory into counties, which broadly serve as the devolved unit of the state. Under the county, many communities will be constituted through the framework of legislation into city governments, or for smaller communities in several eastern states as townships. It is at the level of the county and city government that functions typical of local governments are performed. Some of the functions of the counties include vehicle license registration. They are also responsible for law enforcement through the office of the sheriff, as well as fire service. In urban areas, the civil government usually takes on these functions. The government of most counties is determined by local elections. City governments are very variable in size and importance, and there are four main models of governance at this level, such as the mayoral model, the managerial model, etc. Summary: public administration in the United States has developed elaborately over the years and operates within an administrative context that is both federal and presidential in nature. In the civil service, the Peddleton Act of 1883 was critical to the evolution of the civil service, since it transformed the civil service from a patronage-based system to one based on merit. One of the characteristics of the civil service is the dichotomy between politics and administration, but this has come under severe attack more recently, as very senior administrative positions are now left for political appointees. Assessment of officials is based on satisfactory performance. This is the end of lecture 10. Thank you for listening.